Hey guys, it's Dr. Bickling from Own It Dental. And as always, here's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a follow-up from the last one. I'm going to teach you how to make the most productive schedule possible. And I'll tell you about how I went about creating this idea, and we'll go from there. So it all kind of starts when I was a young dentist. You know, when we're young dentists, we're not great at, selling or doing a lot of big treatment, so we're kind of stuck doing all the fillings, right? So in a day's time, I might see 10, 15, 20 patients, but they're all small, a filling here, a couple fillings there. And let's just say I got really good at doing class 2 composites, right? So I was very busy as a young dentist, but I wasn't very productive as a young dentist. And I hate being busy, but I like being productive. Then as time went on, as you know from my history, I became the chief dental officer of a large dental corporation that I helped grow from 1 to 26 offices. And I found that a lot of the young associates that worked for me fell into that same trap, that busy trap. And at the end of the day, they might see 10 or 15 patients, but there would only be $2,000, $1,500 worth of production. So I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. There has to be a way that I could kind of mass market a way of scheduling that was as productive as humanly possible. And also, beside the point, we have to understand we're not the ones creating our schedule. There's people at the front desk that are the ones, basically putting the appointments on the schedule. And oftentimes we're at the whim of the front desk, wherever they want to put things, right? And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. So I came up with a little experiment, and what I did was I took a magnetic whiteboard, and on that whiteboard I put basically a blank schedule from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And I made little magnetic appointments, different lengths and different dollar amounts, different procedures. So it would be, like an hour long for a crown, and that crown might be $1,000, or it could be 30 minutes for an extraction, and that might be $75, or 2 hours for a root canal core and crown, and maybe that's $2,500, right? And I flipped them all, upside down so nobody could see, and I put them in a box. And I ran 3 different experiments on 3 different types of scheduling methods. And the first one was just random scheduling, right? So I had this classroom with 26 offices worth of front desk staff and office managers, and I would just call them up one at a time. And they would reach into a box, and we would just we did random scheduling, and they would just randomly pick one, and no matter what it was, they would just put it randomly anywhere on the schedule. And then what I would do is, and then that person would go to the end, and then the next person would come up, and they would randomly pick an appointment, and again, they would put it on the schedule, and anywhere they wanted, wherever they felt like it. And then at the end of once that appointment day was filled, then I would just tally up all of the appointments and how much production it was. And in general, they usually ended up around $2,000 to $3,000. So I started seeing a pattern, and we ran this experiment over and over again, and every time was about the same, $2,000 to $3,000, whenever we just did some random scheduling. So then we said, well, there's some offices that do production blocks. All right, so you do a block in the morning, maybe a 2-hour block in the morning for production, and a 2-hour block in the afternoon for production. And the only thing that can go into those production blocks are things that are over $1,000. So again, you call people up one at a time, they reach in, they pull out an appointment, right? Because you don't know who's going to call. You don't know what's going to show up. So that still has to be random. But their only rules were it had to be $1,000 or more to go into the production block. The problem is they might pick out a crown for $1,000, but it's a 2-hour block. So then that production block now, that 2-hour production block now gets filled up with 1 crown. And maybe there's an hour, but maybe that hour doesn't get filled that other hour. So what we ended up finding was when we used production blocks, it certainly was more productive when we tallied it up. So those typically ran in maybe the $4,000 to $5,000 a day range on average. but it still wasn't the most productive way possible. And what I found was the most productive method of scheduling was what I call the top-down, bottom-up method. And some of you might be familiar with this, especially if you've heard me speak before. But we're going to go into that and how that works right now. But before we do, this is the concept that I want us to kind of think about first. I want us to think about kinetic energy versus potential energy. So we all know that potential energy is stored energy and kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So a car is up on the top of a hill, it's got potential energy. It's stored on the top of the hill because, it's up on a hill. And if it starts rolling, the force of gravity will pull it down. So it's just sitting there, that energy stored inside the car. But if it starts going down this hill, that potential energy then turns into kinetic energy. And the higher up on this hill that car is, the more potential energy it has, and it turns into more kinetic energy. So if that car was only, like right here on the hill, it wouldn't have as much potential energy, therefore it won't have as much kinetic energy. Same thing with the swing. The higher you go up on the swing when you're up here, you have more potential energy that leads to more speed as you come back. So I want us to kind of think about potential energy leading to kinetic energy. The more potential energy something has, the more kinetic energy it'll end up happening. But let's think of it in terms of production. The more potential production something has, it'll eventually potentially turn into more actual production. But if that potential production was only here, it's only going to turn into a limited amount of actual production. So I want us to think about, we want to maximize our potential for producing dentistry. And if we ever leave ourselves in a situation where we have minimal potential, it's only going to minimally turn into minimal production. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too confusing, but that's kind of the thought process I went with. Is I can't really predict what's going to go on my schedule, but I can control the potential for whatever goes on my schedule. And the more potential I have, the more likely that's going to turn into actual production. So let's get into it. So here's a schedule that a doctor had, and this doctor was working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and we have a 2-hour lunch in the middle of the day. And this doctor had a bridge in the afternoon. That's not bad, it's an hour and a half, $2,500 worth of, $3,000 worth of production, right? Okay, so good afternoon, right? And this doctor still has plenty of time open in the morning and plenty of time in the afternoon. This doctor has 2 hours prior and an hour and a half after. So 3.5 hours of potential dentistry, right? But what is the actual potential of that 3.5 hours? So maybe in this 2-hour block here, maybe the doctor can do a root canal core and crown, or maybe they could do another bridge, right? The maximum potential that has is probably another $3,000 maximum, right? And then in this hour and a half, what could this doctor do? Maybe another bridge and, maybe a couple of crowns, right? So the maximum potential that hour and a half has is, maybe another $2,000 to $3,000. So in this instance right here, where this appointment was placed in the middle of the afternoon, breaking that space up into a 2-hour block and an hour and a half block, the maximum potential of these two spaces is maybe $5,000 to $6,000 maximum potential. But what if we change things up a little bit? What if we did what we call the top-down, bottom-up method? So again, there's a lunch here, and if you guys have lunches or not, that's fine, whatever. But what if we either put it at the top of this space, right, or at the bottom? It's the same appointment, right? It's the same amount of open time. It's just that either in this method here, we've consolidated that 3.5 hours. Now before, when that 3.5 hours was broken up, the maximum potential was maybe $5,000, $6,000. But I don't know about you, but if you give me 3.5 hours with a patient alone, I have the potential of doing an entire upper arch or lower arch, right? Or possibly, if I'm hurried, I could potentially even do upper and lower veneers. So I could do $10,000, $20,000 worth of dentistry in 3.5 hours. So my maximum potential in this area here is potentially $10,000 to $20,000, whereas before it may have only been $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 of maximum potential. So again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize our potential. Now, there's no guarantee that a big, cosmetic case is going to come in here, but I can guarantee you, I can't fit a large, full mouth reconstruction into here, right? So I have a saying when it came to scheduling large cases is large cases fit into large spaces. So the larger the space, the larger the potential for production. And the opposite is true too. If there's a small space, you can't put a large case in there. So small cases go into small spaces, right? So this is that top down. So, there's 3.5 hours. It's the same 3.5 hours. It's just that this 3.5 hours has a lot more potential than if we broke it up into a 2-hour block and a 1.5 hour block. So we start our scheduling either from the top and start working our way down, or from the bottom and start working our way up. And the same thing is true up top here. You start either at the top and start working your way down, or at the bottom and start working your way up. And then what you do once these start getting in there is you just start stacking the appointments. The next appointment that goes on this schedule is either going to go down here, it's either going to go immediately under this, or it's going to go right here, right before lunch, or right here, right at the beginning of the day. And let me back up a second. This is for the doctor's production column only. And there was one other rule that I didn't tell you, and I apologize. Anything that goes in this column, we called it high production, and our definition was anything over $500. You can come up with your own definition of high production, but we just said anything over $500. Anything that was non-production would go over here in the side column that you can kind of see the edge of it there, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is only for the doctor's production column. It was anything $500 and above, and we would, only for this column would we schedule things top down, bottom up. Okay, and so then as the other appointments would come in during the day, we could put it after lunch, we could put it here. Whatever these spaces are, we want those spaces as big as humanly possible. And then gradually we just kind of close them down from each end, right? So whatever that space is, we're just stacking the appointments in there and then closing them down from one. So that way that space is as big as it'll ever be and just gradually gets closed down. It'll have the most potential for production that it'll ever have. And then, you may come up and then maybe these middle appointments don't fill in, right? Maybe there's gaps in the middle of the day. And this had its own side benefit. And what's the side benefit to that? Boom, same day emergencies, right? Somebody calls up, has pain, boom, or maybe you find somebody over here in hygiene and they need same day treatment or they're in pain, boom, we fit those in. And that was just a side benefit. That wasn't even something that I anticipated being a benefit of that. Oh, there's also a third benefit to this top-down, bottom-up. When you start your scheduling at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, these are also the times, before work or after work. They're actually a little bit more convenient for patients too. So that was just a third side benefit too to this top-down, bottom-up method. So the non-production column, I did mention that. You'll notice over here on the non-production column, everything over here is an hour, right? Whether it's a 15-minute appointment, 10-minute appointment, whatever. Everything over there is an hour. And you can see that it's not top-down, bottom-up. There's actually some stuff in the middle of the day. These are like your crown inserts, your bite guard inserts, little things, anything $500 or less. The reason why everything over here is an hour is because, even if it takes 10 minutes, is because there's nothing on that side column that's going to make your day, right? But there's plenty of stuff that could break your day. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say I had a bunch of bite guards to insert or a bunch of crowns to insert. It only takes me 10, 15, 20 minutes to insert a crown. But what if I had a bunch of 20-minute appointments all stacked on top of each other? And worse yet, what if they were all right here, right at the end of the day? You're tired, you want to go home, your staff wants to go home, your patients don't want to sit around and wait forever, right? So I always said, just make everything an hour in the side column. Take your time. You have plenty of time to do the bite guard. You got plenty of time to do the crown insert. But you want to focus your time and your energy on these patients here. That way you're never running behind. You've got time to come over here and see your hygiene checks and all that stuff. And it just makes for one of those beautiful, well-run days, as productive as possible, without all the busy running around. So anyway, that's our top-down, bottom-up method that I came up with, and it has proven over time to be the most productive method of scheduling. Perhaps you have one that's better, and if so, that's great. But this is the one that I found to be the most productive and used a semi or quasi-scientific method to come up with it. And if you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact me. Happy to go over it with you. Again, I'm Dr. Bickling, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.